have you ever heard a horse scream in despair? Not from pain, not from fear, but because it carried a memory that humanity tried to bury for nearly half a century. A scream echoed across Wyoming, shattering the stillness of dawn, like a summons rising from the earth itself. 3 men stood before a pit of mud, cold as ash. A wild horse lay motionless, with eyes burning gold, like the last ember left after the end of the world. They thought they were saving an animal, but they had no idea. They had just awakened a soul. And what happened next will make you cry, break down, and then rise again, believing this. No soul ever truly disappears. They're just waiting for someone quiet enough to finally listen. And so it begins. In a place where the wind remembers everything we try to forget. Wyoming. March. The wind had changed direction, and the land hadn't warmed up just yet. Some mornings don't begin with the crow of a rooster, but with a sound that shouldn't exist on a prairie, a scream, deep, cracked, and so out of place it sent a chill through the bones. Elias Monroe was stoking the fire when that sound tore through the air. He was 68, living in a gray wooden house tucked away at the end of the pasture for more than 3 decades, ever since his wife passed and his son left for good. Each day rolled by like a song without notes, silent, weathered, and not meant to be heard by anyone. But this morning, something ripped that song apart. Elias stood frozen by the window, coffee mug trembling slightly in his hand. He wasn't sure if it was an animal or a person, but it echoed from the east, where the forest met the old marshland. A place no one dared to go when the fog still hung thick in the air. 15 minutes later, a dusty pickup truck growled down the dirt road. Ben, the sunburned neighbor with salt white hair, was behind the wheel, his face tight as a drawn wire. "You heard that?" "I did," Elias nodded. Otis heard it too. "Grab a shovel." "I don't think it was an animal." No more words were spoken. 3 old men, each carrying a winter behind their eyes, climbed into the truck as if chasing after something long lost. The rain started falling in a slow, fine mist. The truck stopped at the low end of the valley, a hollow patch that had stayed dry all winter, now swelling strangely from the rain. Elias stepped out first. He felt the earth beneath his boots. It wasn't earth anymore. It was soft, sunken, almost breathing. And then, they saw it. A pit of sludge. Wide as a well's mouth. Gray as cold ash. And in the center of it, a black shape. Still. Silent. No, not completely still. "Dear God," Ben whispered, stepping closer. Otis crouched down, squinting hard. It's still alive." Everything went quiet. No wind. No birds. Only breathing, faint, fragile, like the earth itself was hissing through a soul not quite dead. A rise in the mud, maybe a head. And that shimmer, it was an eye, half open, staring up at the sky as if waiting for something to arrive. Elias said nothing. He just pulled off his gloves and walked slowly to the edge of the pit. The mud sank underfoot. He plunged his hand into the muck, ice cold, and for the first time in years, he felt his heart beat like it did when he was a boy. "Get the rope. Get the shovels. Now." Otis ran without asking questions. Ben stood still for another breath, then nodded. "We can't let it die here." No one knew why they did what they did. 3 old men, with no obligation, no reward, only one certainty. That creature wasn't screaming, wasn't thrashing, wasn't resisting. It was silent, waiting, like a forgotten soul testing whether the world still had anyone left willing to kneel. And they, all three of them, knelt. No one said another word. They simply bowed down and let time pass through the work of their hands. It took them 2 full hours. 2 hours without speaking, without asking, without needing a reason. Only calloused hands digging earth, clawing through mud, and unearthing something that had been buried far too long. The mud was so cold it numbed their tendons. But no one stopped. Elias carved a space beneath the creature's chest with a shovel, while Ben hammered stakes to keep the soil from caving in. Otis waded in waist deep, wrapping a rope around the horse's body like he was embracing something too broken to fall again. They didn't know its name. Didn't know how long it had been down there. But they knew it wasn't dead. And as long as it hadn't let go of its last breath, they had no right to let go either. The final pull was the hardest. A low groan escaped as the horse's entire body slipped from the pit, landing heavy on the bank like a boulder blanketed in ash. The drizzle stopped just then, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. Ben exhaled. Otis collapsed to his knees. Elias stood still, unmoving. The creature lay motionless, legs trembling faintly, but its chest still rose and fell. It was alive. "Dear God," Otis whispered, wiping mud from his eyes. "We actually got it out." Elias dropped to his knees. His hands trembled. Mud coated the horse, dark and thick, like the ash after a fire long extinguished. The only thing untouched were its eyes. They were open. Not wide. Not gleaming. Just open and watching. Unblinking. Unflinching. Free of pain, free of fear. Eyes the color of burning gold, so still and deep they made the skin crawl. It wasn't looking like an animal would, not in fear, not in pleading. It was simply there, present, as if the gaze had lived a long, long time and had returned. Elias wasn't looking at a horse. He was staring into something as old as a forest that had been chopped down. Those eyes dragged Elias back to 1970. A summer. A wooden stall. A great colt with wild, watchful eyes. He'd seen that look before. But how could it be? Ben nudged Elias gently. "You all right?" Elias nodded. But he wasn't. Not because of the cold, but because something in that creature's eyes was calling back a part of him he'd long buried. They didn't load it into a truck. They fashioned a makeshift wooden sled and pulled it by rope. Otis lined it with straw. Ben laid down an old army blanket from his grandfather's time. And Elias took off his coat and draped it across the horse's still shivering back. All the way back to the barn, the creature made no sound. No neigh. No whimper. No struggle. It simply breathed, soft as wind, and gazed up at the pale gray sky. That night, the little barn glowed with light for the first time in years. They hung an old oil lantern, the one Elias kept without knowing why, from the rafters. Its amber glow lit up the horse's body, making it look like a statue dug up from some ancient place. The air inside changed. It no longer felt like a barn. It felt like a ritual. No one dared speak loudly. No one dared breathe too hard. Only the sound of wind tapping through the wooden slats, like a witness. Otis placed a bowl of water near the horse's muzzle. It didn't drink. Ben reached to touch its shoulder. It didn't move. But when Elias sat directly in front of it, those eyes shifted and locked onto his. This time, Elias felt held. He couldn't turn away. Couldn't break free. Those eyes, Ben whispered. "Do you see it?" "I see it." Elias swallowed hard. He had never believed in souls. But right now, he couldn't deny the feeling of being watched. Not the way a dying creature watches, but the way something does when it's waiting for you to remember who it is. Otis stepped forward and gently brushed away the dried mud from its body. Its back was all bone and sinew, lean, withered. No brand. No chip. No trace of ownership. "No one owns it," Otis muttered. "Or if they once did, they gave it up long ago." Elias nodded slightly. He placed his hand over the crusted layer of mud on its flank. "Like ashes," he murmured. "Like after something explodes, and all that's left is this." Ben looked up. "Ashes?" "Ashes from a soul that once burned," Elias whispered. He looked into those golden eyes once more. Then he spoke, not to the others, but to the being in front of him. "Ashfall." Ben blinked. "A name?" "Yes," Elias said, eyes unwavering. "I think it used to have a name. But now, this is the name it brings back with it." And so, the horse was named. Not because it needed a name, but because some souls deserve to be called something more than animal. That night, Elias didn't sleep. Not because of the cold. Not because of fear. But because something in the air, like an old whisper, was weaving itself into every breath he took. The barn was lit only by a small oil lamp, swaying gently in the breeze. Ashfall lay still, his golden eyes still open, not watching the man, but gazing into a time long forgotten. Elias sat leaning against the wooden post near the stall door. His hands were tucked into his coat, legs stretched out, palms still warm from the horse's breath. He didn't look at it, but he knew it was there. Silent, like a verdict that hadn't yet been read. The wind slipped through the cracks in the planks, and in that wind was a scent Elias hadn't smelled in years. Old straw, wet earth, the smell of childhood. And then the memories began to surface. Not loud, not sudden, just falling into place, one by one, as gently as dust on an old coat. Back in 1978, Elias was just an 11-year-old boy, quiet, withdrawn, always trailing behind his father like a shadow. His father was a Wyoming man through and through, tight-lipped, firm-handed, commanding the ranch like it was a battlefield. They raised cattle, not horses. Horses, in his father's eyes, were nothing but trouble. Wild, wasteful, useless. But that summer, a horse came anyway. No one knew from where. It appeared by the East Creek, limping, bleeding, gray-coated, small, like a wisp of cloud that had lost its way. His father said, "Leave it be. It'll die." But Elias didn't listen. Every evening, after feeding the cattle, he'd sneak down to the creek, a piece of bread in one hand, a fistful of hay in the other, and the trembling hands of a boy who had never felt a muzzle press against his fingers before. 1 week. 2 weeks. The horse began to follow him all the way to the edge of the wooden fence. He hid it inside, laid down straw, wiped its legs with an old rag, used a rusted metal bowl to hold water. No one knew, except him and the horse. He named it Hope, because it arrived just when Elias thought there was nothing left worth waiting for on that dust-choked land. Elias looked up at the barn ceiling. The wood had darkened with age, but just above the left beam, where it met the old support post, the carving was still there. He stood, walked slowly to it. The oil lamp flickered above. His fingers, trembling slightly, brushed over the wood. Summer 78, Wild Hope. That was the message Elias had carved, using a pencil sharpening knife, on a still afternoon, when hope had rested its head on his shoulder and breathed. He closed his eyes, and once again, he heard his father's voice. Cold, tight, sharpened like a blade. Stop fussing over that thing. You won't save it. Let a man handle it. They took Hope the next day. A white truck. Steel bed. No questions asked. His father stood by, arms folded, like he was watching a bag of trash finally hauled to where it belonged. Elias cried that night. Not for the horse, but because, for the first time in his life, he felt he had betrayed something he couldn't name. A soft breath brought him back. Ashfall still lay there, but now his eyes were closed. Elias returned to his spot, sat down. His chest still felt tight. How could it be? A wild horse, no chip, no brand, no name, appearing right here, in the same wooden barn. And that look, the exact same eyes he remembered from that one summer as a boy. Elias didn't believe in reincarnation. Didn't believe in miracles either. But sometimes, he thought, if there was a place where memory never died, it was on the backs of wild creatures who never learned how to lie. He turned again to look at the old carving, then back at Ashfall, and he whispered, unsure if he was speaking to himself or to something beyond him. I'm sorry I let you go. The wind swept through the roof slats again, and Elias could have sworn he felt a soft warmth brush against his back, like the touch of a horse's muzzle. Time passed inside the barn like it would in a chapel. No one entered. No one left. Elias didn't sleep. Didn't need to. He simply sat there, like a man keeping watch over something that was about to rise. The sun hadn't broken yet, but outside, the wind had begun to shift. Morning didn't arrive like sunlight. It came as a deepening silence. Elias was still sitting there, his head resting against the wooden beam, eyes half closed. He wasn't asleep, but he wasn't fully awake either. It was as if his mind was slowly merging with something far greater than himself. A breeze slipped in from the east. The barn door remained shut, save for a narrow crack, a slit of pale gray cutting across the dim horizon. And behind him, a movement. Soft, but unmistakable. Elias opened his eyes and saw it. Ashfall was rising. He didn't shake off. He didn't brace his legs. He stood as if the earth itself had lifted him, vertebra by vertebra, breath by breath, like an ancient rite of resurrection. No sound, no whinny, no groan, only presence. Solemn, still, and Elias felt, suddenly, small, like a child standing before a sacred gate, unsure whether he was worthy to pass through. Ashfall didn't look at Elias. He didn't look around the barn. He only looked east. his head held high, ears pointed, like antennae tuned to a frequency man was never meant to hear. The dim light from the cracked door caught his golden eyes, not with fire, but with the bronze glow of something ancient, like the gaze of a weathered statue carved by forgotten hands. Elias dared not move. He held his breath. Something was happening, and if he broke the moment, the world might derail from its true path. Ashfall stepped forward. One step, then another. Each footfall like touching earth for the first time in many lifetimes. His hooves met the wooden floor without a sound, as if gravity no longer applied to his kind. He stopped right at the door. The breeze from the slit brushed through his mane, raising a few strands. He kept looking east, unblinking, unmoving. Elias swallowed. A chill rippled down his spine, not from fear, but from knowing he was witnessing something unrepeatable. Ashfall didn't eat that day, didn't drink, didn't lie down. He just stood there and stared, never leaving the doorway, never once responding to Elias's voice, never blinking. Otis stopped by in the late afternoon. The moment he saw the scene, he froze, then stepped back quietly, lingering at the threshold without asking a word. Ben peered through the wall slats, then whispered to Elias, as if afraid to disturb a sacred rite. That horse, he didn't come to be rescued. Elias nodded, saying nothing, because deep down, he knew. Ashfall came to awaken something humanity had long tried to forget. Night fell. The wind grew stronger. The trees outside rustled like thousands of hands whispering in a language no man could translate anymore. The oil lamp still burned, but now its light could no longer reach Ashfall's face. He remained there, same place, same posture, all day, unmoved. Elias didn't sleep that night. He laid a blanket near the stall door, resting on his side, eyes wide open, watching, breath by breath, for even the smallest change. And then, it happened. No sound warned of it. No sign gave it away. Ashfall lifted his head high, neck stretched tall, ears locked forward, as if touching the stars. And then, he roared. But it wasn't a neigh, not a cry, not a plea. It was a sound, ancient, low, deep, like the voice of the earth itself. Elias jolted upright. That sound didn't come from Ashfall's mouth. It came from within his chest, or perhaps from the very ribs of the barn itself. It shook the wooden walls. Dust rained from the rafters. The lamp swayed wildly, and Elias felt as if echoes buried for decades were suddenly breaking free inside his chest. Ashfall held that form, head high, chest wide, eyes blazing, and roared again. The second call felt different, like a summoning, not for Elias, not for any human, but for something else, something far away, or buried very, very deep. And then silence, total, complete, as if nothing had ever happened. Only Elias's ragged breathing remained, and the air inside the barn, now heavy with the scent of ashes, as though fire had once passed through and left memory behind. Ashfall lowered his head. No sound, no struggle. He turned, walked slowly to the far corner of the barn, and lay down, For the first time in 2 days, he closed his eyes, as if his task was done, as if the reason he had returned to this earth had been fulfilled. Elias watched him, his chest tight like he'd just run through a forest. He didn't understand, but he didn't need to, because what he had just heard wasn't meant to be understood. It was a signal, a relic, a door that had just opened. Outside, the moon had risen. Its silver glow poured across the barn roof, like cool water washing away dust. But Elias didn't look at the moon. He kept his eyes on Ashfall's silhouette, now still like a resting soul. And he knew everything was about to change. Elias drifted off right there on the cold ground beside the barn. Not because he was tired, but because something pulled him out of reality. He wasn't sleeping, but he was no longer inside himself. In the dream, there was wind, a faint light, the scent of hay and rotting wood. And there was him, standing inside an old photograph, next to a gray colt, small, with a mane the color of ash. No one had taken the photo. There was no visible background. Just two figures, silent, standing side by side like they had been for 1,000 years. The face of Elias in the photo was younger, much younger. A teenage boy, maybe. His arm was draped over the colt's neck, and the horse was staring straight into an invisible lens, with those familiar, ash-gold eyes. Elias whispered into the dream, "This isn't my memory." But the dream didn't answer. It simply stayed, lingering, like a fog that refused to lift. A click at the door stirred him awake. Morning had come. Ben was pushing open the barn, holding something wrapped in an old cloth. "You need to see this," Ben said softly, as though not to wake Ashfall. Though the horse was still lying there, unmoving, like carved stone. Elias sat up, still dazed. "What is it?" Ben laid the bundle on the wooden floor. "The old shed behind the pasture. I was looking for a tarp for the cattle, and found this in a rusted metal trunk." He unwrapped the cloth. Inside, a stack of yellowed, tattered papers, and in the middle of them, a black and white photo, faded with time. Elias froze. It was the photograph from his dream. The boy in the picture was him. There was no mistaking it, the eyes, the shoulders, the awkward stance. That was him. 15, maybe 16. And next to him, the gray colt. No name. No note. Just a faint ink scribble on the back. June 1978, Elias and Wild Hope. Elias clutched the photo. His chest tightened, like seeing a part of his own body that had once been cut away. Ben flipped through the rest of the papers. There was a folded document. A red seal, now faded, typed across the top. Private transfer, equine, internal. Below were handwritten entries. Breed, Mustang, juvenile. Condition, semi-domestic, untagged. Status, wild capture, non-listed. Handler, Franklin Monroe. Resolution, relocation, non-reportable. Final, transfer to private holding per verbal agreement. Signature, F. Monroe. Elias's eyes stopped at the final line. Franklin Monroe. His father. His heart paused. "You okay?" Ben asked quietly. Elias didn't answer right away. He turned the photo over in his hand again, reading the words. Wild Hope. The name he had carved into the barn's beam. The name he'd once believed had never truly existed. But now everything was real. And somehow he had been made to forget. The room felt like it tilted inside Elias's mind. What he once thought was dream was now ink on paper. What he once believed was a child's fantasy was signed by his father. His father. The man who said, "It's going to die." The man who always stood with folded arms, eyes cold, voice never gentle enough to make Elias feel safe. The man who had signed the transfer papers for Wild Hope. Off the books. No report. No record. Just a verbal agreement. A quiet solution. A chill ran down Elias's back. Ben sat beside him. I didn't think old Franklin would have done something like that. Elias shook his head. He would. He always would. To him, everything was an asset. And if it didn't bring value, it didn't belong. He looked again at the photo, his fingers trembling as they touched the colt's head in the image. And I let him take it from me. And I didn't even try to take it back. Ben didn't speak. They sat in silence, two old men, a forgotten photo, and a truth unburied after nearly 50 years. Elias stood. He took the photo and the documents and walked into the barn. Ashfall was still lying there. But now, his eyes were open. Watching. No words. No gesture. Elias knelt down in front of him. He placed the photograph on the wooden floor, between himself and the horse. And then, in a voice that had been caught in his throat for 47 years, he whispered, I remembered you. But I didn't dare remember. Because to remember, I'd have to admit I let you go. Ashfall didn't move. Only his eyes, those old, gold, silent eyes, remained fixed on the photo. Elias bowed his head. For the first time, he cried. Not for the memory, but for the truth he had finally let himself see. This wasn't a dream memory. This wasn't some mystical image. This was real. A life that had existed. A soul that had been taken and had now come back. Outside, the wind changed. And for the first time in decades, Elias felt ready to face what had long been buried inside his chest. Because some things cannot be buried. Not with time. Not with forgetting. Not with the cold ink of a father's signature. The wind that night never slept. It circled the barn roof, slid down the valley, slipped through each blade of grass as if whispering secrets. Secrets only unsleeping souls could hear. Elias didn't close his eyes, not even once. He stayed by Ashfall's side. The horse's eyes were now closed, but it wasn't the sleep of rest. It was the stillness of one waiting for a signal to rise again. The photograph between them was stained with dew, its faces blurred by years and longing. The eyes in the photo, and the eyes of Ashfall, reflected the same color, ashen gold, sharp and endless. Elias whispered, If this is a call, who will answer? No one replied. But the morning heard. The sun didn't rise as it usually did. It split through a bank of gray clouds, like a golden gash torn across a patched-up sky. Elias stepped outside the barn, shoulders still heavy as if he carried a whole winter upon his back. Ashfall was already standing, silent, towering. He didn't look at Elias. He didn't turn his head. He faced only the distant woods. East. The same posture as yesterday. But something was different. The air, the ground, the very space itself. Something was drawing near. Elias squinted into the haze. And then he saw. Beyond the shroud of fog, just past the pines, there was movement. No hoofbeats. No whinnies. No clouds of dust. They weren't running. They were walking. A herd of horses. Wild. Ancient. As old and deep as the land itself. 10, maybe more. Not one alike. But they moved as one, as if choreographed by some invisible music. Leading was a jet black mare, her mane long, her eyes as dark as a cave's heart. Following her, a silver-gray stallion, a copper-coated one, and then a young colt, smaller, his coat the color of ashes. Elias gripped the barn door. The colt. His eyes, uncannily like ash falls. Not wide and bright like a young horse's should be, but narrow, deep, golden, as if they'd already seen many lifetimes. Ben appeared behind him, breathless. "Elias, do you see it?" He nodded. "I see it," he whispered. I don't know what to do." Otis was the last to arrive. He froze at the sight, shovel dropping to the ground with a dull thud. "Oh, Lord." He spoke, or prayed, no one could tell. All three men stood in silent awe. The horses kept walking, not fast, not slow. Like a ceremony. Like they were entering sacred ground, knowing exactly why they'd come. Not a single horse looked at the men. They faced only Ashfall, still standing motionless at the barn, as if waiting for them since a former life. Elias felt his chest clench. Not out of fear, but because he knew something was about to be revealed. The colt at the end of the herd walked slower than the others, as if drawn by some unseen thread, his gaze fixed on Elias. When he drew closest, no more than 30 feet away, he stopped. Then, like an ember still alive beneath a pile of ash, he let out a sound. Soft, but unmistakable. Not a whinny. Not a call. It was an ancient whisper, meant for Elias alone. Elias lowered his head to the wooden rail. He didn't cry. Didn't tremble. But every memory from 1978 flooded back, breaking the dam he'd built for decades. "That's his," Otis blurted out. "It has to be. It's got Ashfall's eyes." Ben slowly placed a hand on Elias's shoulder. "Maybe it's not just his child. Maybe it's a connection. What was cut away, now being returned." The whole herd stopped in front of the barn. Ashfall still didn't move, but his eyes were wet. For the first time since their meeting, Elias saw Ashfall's eyes shimmering with tears. They didn't fall. They simply glistened, like a soul drawing one last breath before being reborn. And then Ashfall stepped forward. One step. Another. Slowly, like an old king leaving his throne to bow before something holier than himself. The entire herd shifted in unison, parting to make way. The young colt remained where he stood. Elias saw he trembled, just slightly, but did not back away. And then Ashfall touched his muzzle to the colt's forehead. The whole valley fell silent. No wind. No birds. Not even the breath of the three men watching. Only one thing remained. A soul had come home, and another had just been named. The field, after that brief moment of forehead touch between two souls, fell into stillness, as if the earth itself was holding a ritual inside its heart. Ashfall and the young colt still stood, heads bowed together, foreheads pressed and unmoving. Those few seconds passed like they might have belonged to an entirely different lifetime. Elias didn't notice the clouds, didn't feel the cold, didn't hear Ben or Otis behind him. He saw only the scene in front of him, like watching a sacred wedding without words. And clearly, something was beginning. One by one, the other horses approached. Each came forward alone, deliberately, stepping into the sacred space between Ashfall and Elias. They didn't gallop. They didn't nudge or jostle. They simply touched. Muzzles pressed gently to Ashfall's chest, to his shoulder, to his eyes. And each time it happened, Elias felt the air in his lungs shift. The ground beneath his boots hum ever so faintly. But it was enough. Enough to know. This was no longer something of the human world. Each horse, after touching Ashfall, turned and took its place, forming a perfect circle around the barn, like sentinels or monks guarding a holy tomb. Elias felt like a child, stepping into a ritual far older than anything he'd ever dared imagine. And so, when he placed his hand on the barn gate, he inhaled deeply, like a priest preparing to unseal a forbidden chamber, like someone about to cross a line they weren't meant to cross. But he opened the gate. The bottom scraped against the wood floor with a soft creak, a sound so small, yet it cracked through Elias's chest like breaking bone. And Ashfall stepped out, slow, silent, each hoof falling as if it touched sacred ground, as if he'd just returned from some cave of meditation, bearing the weight of lifetimes. The first he approached was the ashen gray colt. They bowed heads again, and this time Elias saw it. Ashfall inhaled, deep and slow, and when he exhaled, the air didn't just stir, it changed. The scent became thicker, earthy, ancient, like dust and ashes and the breath of something greater than mankind. The colt trembled, then circled Ashfall once, and came to a stop right beside Elias. Ashfall turned, slowed, and touched his muzzle to Elias's forehead. And in that moment, Elias knew. Ashfall was not just a horse. He was every belief Elias had ever carried, every love he had ever lost, every truth he had buried deep enough to forget, and longed, secretly, to find again. Ashfall looked into his eyes, and bowed his head. There was no sound, no call, no cry, but something had been passed. Outside the barn, the herd lifted their heads all at once. Elias turned to Otis. "I think he's made his choice." Ben said nothing. He only nodded. And Elias, for the first time in years, stepped back to let a soul continue its journey. The herd, still holding their circle like a sacred rite, began to move again. Their hooves didn't stomp. They drummed, low, deliberate, like a heartbeat inside the earth. A procession of souls, returning, not to haunt, but to bear witness, not to mourn what was lost, but to begin something sworn. In the shifting silence of dawn, Ashfall walked with them. And Elias, in that moment, no longer felt like an old man. He was simply a witness to a resurrection and a question still echoing in the quiet chambers of his heart. Did that old soul ever truly leave? The question from the end of the last chapter still echoed in Elias's heart. Did that soul ever truly leave? And the answer came with the breaking of dawn. By noon, while Ashfall had vanished into the distance, Elias stood silently before the field behind the old ranch, where the earth had stayed frozen for 40 years. Nothing ever grew there. No trees. No birdsong. Not even a deer's hoof print. Only dead grass and dust. Ashes and silence. He remembered clearly, his father had once called it burnt ground. But deep inside, Elias had always sensed this wasn't just barren soil. It was land that had screamed. Elias, Otis, and Ben carried shovels. No one said a word. They all knew what they were about to unearth wasn't just earth. They picked the center, where faint cracks had split the hardened surface. And with every shovel hitting the ground, Elias felt a reverberation, as if each strike was echoing back through time. Then, on the fourth layer, heavy clumps of dirt shattered, and the first truth revealed itself. Bones. Not wild game. Impossible. It was a horse's ribcage, undeniable. Massive. Solid. Buried beneath decades of time, ash, and guilt. Otis gasped. Ben dropped his shovel and fell to his knees, digging with bare hands, fingers trembling as if he were disarming a bomb. Not just one, Ben stammered. This is a slaughter site. Elias could no longer feel his hands. His body moved purely on instinct now. As they dug deeper, memories began to bleed through the dirt like open wounds. A snapped leg bone, cleanly sliced. A length of leather still knotted tightly around a rotted neck. And then, a metal tag. Caked in rust. But the letters still there, waiting. Ben reached for a knife. Elias whispered, "Careful. Don't scratch the past." Ben wiped it clean, and the name rose from the grave like a curse from beneath the earth. Mustang, Wild Hope, captured, July 1978. Otis stumbled back. Elias stood frozen, turned to stone. The very air around them had stopped breathing. His eyes locked onto the tag. His knees buckled without permission. "It's not a dream anymore," Elias whispered through clenched teeth. "It's him. They buried him here. Like trash." The clouds above began to swirl, thick and gray, pressing down like the weight of forgotten sins. Ben scanned the area. "Keep digging. There's more. I swear, this isn't the only grave." The next 30 minutes were hell. 3 pits. 3 graves. And in each, a skeleton of a horse, stacked like merchandise. No names. No farewell. Not buried out of mercy. Buried to erase. Each grave had another tag. Each tag, another blade into Elias's heart. One bore slanted, handwritten text. Unnamed colt, unfit, transferred, July 81. Then, a small manila folder. Its edges rotted. Faith, eroded by time. Ben unfolded it. Otis didn't move. Elias couldn't breathe. The first page read clearly. Private Equine Disposal, Western Federal Division. below, a list. Names, codes, species, status, and at the very bottom, a slap so sharp it tore through Elias's chest. Franklin Monroe, site supervisor. Elias's heart dropped like a stone into a well with no bottom. His father, the man who once said, "We don't race horses." The man who muttered, "It'll die anyway." The man who stood with folded arms as the white truck dragged Hope away, like he was hauling off a sack of waste. Elias collapsed onto the dirt. His body shook, but he didn't pass out. The truth was too clear, too sharp, too conscious. Otis placed a trembling hand on Elias's shoulder. "You didn't do this," he said softly. "But you were the one who saw it." Ben clenched his jaw, voice trembling but firm. "We need a monument. We need to carve it in stone, so generations from now will know souls were silenced here by human hands." The wind stirred. The earth began to breathe. A pulse. From below, Elias reached into the grave. His fingers touched cold bone, and he wept. Not loud, not desperate, but the kind of weeping that doesn't belong to the present. Tears born in the summer of 1978. Tears for a gray colt that once leaned on his shoulder. Tears for wild eyes that once met his through wooden rails. Now, all that remained were bones. Beneath an ash-colored sky at dusk, Elias whispered to the earth, "I remember you, and I've spent too long afraid to remember. But from now on, memory is not a burden. It's a duty." Ashfall was gone, but the soul of wild hope had never left, and the bones beneath the soil had awakened the conscience above it. Ashfall returned with the herd just as dusk touched the edge of the sky. No sound, no warning, only a presence, deep and still, as if even the wind had held its breath. Elias was standing by the makeshift gravestone carved for wild hope. The soil had not yet dried. Ash still clung to the creases of his hands. When he looked up, Ashfall was already there. No one had called him, but he had come back. And as he stepped toward Elias, his eyes no longer held the unrest of a lost soul, but the quiet knowing of a being who had walked through every level of hell. To say only one thing: "I forgive you." He did not whinny. He did not groan. He did not flinch. He simply touched his forehead to Elias's hand, the one still dusted with soil from the old grave. Elias trembled. His palm came to rest on Ashfall's brow. No words, but something healed. Otis turned away, as if not wanting to intrude on that moment. Ben whispered, almost to the earth itself, "Trust has finally come home." Ashfall took a step back, then turned. The wild horses began to move, as if a silent signal had been given. One by one, they left their places, quiet, measured, falling in line behind him. A slow silver procession headed toward the deep forest, to where they had come from, to where they belonged. Only one didn't move. The young colt, ash-gray coat, golden eyes, still stood to Elias's right, as if asking, "May I stay?" Elias looked at him, then into those eyes. No doubt remained. He gave a soft nod. "You are what remains." not ashes of the past, but a living spark born from them. Otis stepped closer, resting a hand on the colt's back. "So, what will you call him?" Elias looked out toward the horizon, where the fading sun had dyed the land in copper tones. "Cinder." Ben nodded. "That name is a beginning." Elias said nothing, but he knew it wasn't just a name. It was a promise. The final embers still glowing after a firestorm of history. And now it had been passed on. Not to be owned. Not to be kept. But to be remembered. And carried forward. The following spring, flowers bloomed on the backfield behind Elias's ranch for the first time in 40 years. No one could explain why. But the townsfolk believed something had awakened beneath the soil. Elias restored the old wooden barn. Not to raise. Not to shelter. But to remember. He placed a small marble headstone at the barn's entrance. Nothing grand. Nothing loud. But every chiseled letter carried the weight of a soul. Here, a spirit returned, not to live, but to pass on memory. Otis brought flowers each month. Ben planted soft grass around the barn so the children's bare feet wouldn't hurt when they ran. And yes, the children came. No one told them to. No one advertised. But somehow, they heard the story. They came to meet Cinder, to stroke the ash-gray mane, to giggle when the young colt leaned into their hands with warm, velvet curiosity. Cinder never wandered far, but sometimes he would pause, ears tilted, and look eastward toward the woods. He never neighed, never panicked. He simply listened. Elias understood, because sometimes he listened too. On clear nights, when the wind moved just right across the hills, it carried something in it, not a voice, not a howl, but a call. Low, gentle, like the breath of a soul. Ashfall never returned, but Elias knew he had never truly left. Not in body, but in memory, in the pulse of the land, in the gaze still burning in Cinder's golden eyes. And just like that, an old horse barn became something else. Not a stable, but a resurrection. Not just of horses, but of the human heart. We once believed we saved a horse, but in truth, it came back to awaken the part of us long forgotten, long buried beneath time, sorrow, and the silence we feared to confront. No soul truly disappears. They don't die. They wait, quietly, until someone brave enough, gentle enough, comes along, to listen to the pain that was never given a name. If you're standing in a quiet place in your life right now, if you've lost something or someone, know this. Nothing meaningful is ever truly lost. As long as you still have the love to remember, every soul will find its way back home. If this story touched something deep within you, leave us a comment below. We'd love to hear how it moved you. And please share this story with someone who needs it. And subscribe to Gallop of Glory so you never miss the next soul-stirring journey. Somewhere out there, a soul is still waiting for someone quiet enough to finally listen.